Sin took away your peace. The way to get peace back is to deal with sin. But an unrighteous man wants peace without dealing with sin. An unrighteous man wants joy without dealing with sin. And they fail. Unless the problem of sin in your life is dealt with, there will never be blessedness. Not in this life or in the life to come. There will never be true blessedness. It is only as we know righteousness that we will know blessedness. Having looked at the object of our longing, let us look at the longing being described. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. The Lord describes the pursuit using two words that are very familiar. And oh, are you not thankful? I am thankful that He does not just say, blessed are those who seek after righteousness. When He says hunger and thirst, then it is something I can identify with, and that you can hopefully identify with. This desire present in the heart of a true Christian, the desire to go in the direction of true righteousness, is likened to two appetites with which all humanity is familiar: hunger and thirst. Now let's look at the nature of these two longings, hunger and thirst. I want to suggest to you three things about hunger and thirst. One, hunger and thirst are sensible longings. We are looking here at a sensible longing. These two desires inherent in our physical bodies are sensible desires. By sensible, I don't mean reasonable. Rather, I mean that they are appetites that we are conscious about. Since this service began, you have been breathing. And I can tell you, your lungs have an insatiable desire for oxygen. You have been breathing since I began speaking. You are breathing even now without experiencing air pangs. For the majority of us, unless you are unwell, you breathe without being conscious of the fact that your lungs have a desire for oxygen. Air is important. Breathing in and breathing out is an important bodily function, but we are not conscious about it. The same appetite can be said concerning our cells. They have an insatiable appetite for oxygenated, well-nourished blood. But we are never aware, unless one is unwell, that that is the case. The desire for food and water, on the other hand, is not just real like our desire for oxygen. It is also conscious. It is a sensible appetite of the body. And I'm going somewhere with that. We'll come back to it. I think another thing we can say about these two appetites, hunger and thirst, is that they are not just sensible, they are uncomfortable longings. Hunger and thirst are uncomfortable appetites. You will never hear someone say, "Oh, it is so wonderful to be hungry. I look forward every time to times when I am famished." You don't hear someone saying that, do you? Unless it is someone who has struggled to have an appetite for food and now celebrates the fact that after months of never having an appetite for food, they can finally feel hunger. Hunger and thirst can be very uncomfortable appetites. I think another thing I can say about hunger and thirst is that they are useful longings. They They are very useful. If you do what comes naturally with hunger and thirst, then they can be very useful appetites, because they will lead us to the table, to the refrigerator, to the water dispenser for their gratification and for our good. As we consider these three aspects of hunger and thirst, let's now apply them. The God-blessed man, the God-blessed woman, the true Christian, is the one who has a sensible, is the one who has a conscious appetite and thirsts for God and for His truth and for His word and for His salvation and for His will. I say conscious appetite. Let me ask you, do you have a conscious appetite for righteousness? Look back at the last week. Amidst all the activities of the week, you are planning, meticulous planning to watch the COVID-19 updates from the cabinet secretary. You are meticulous planning to do other things. Can you remember a time during the last week when you were consciously yearning to be alone with God? Can you remember a time during this past week when you were with your family or when you were with your workmates? And at such a time, can you remember consciously, just the same way you are conscious when you're hungry and thirsty, can you remember a time this week when with family or with colleagues, when you consciously were yearning to demonstrate practical righteousness, practical godliness in the way of mercy, purity, peacemaking before them? Did you have any conscious appetite for righteousness this week? An appetite that led you to the Word of God so that you may know His will for your life? An appetite that led you to prayer, that you may receive grace to be a holy man or woman that day? Can you remember such a thing? Do you know anything about what I am talking about? Jesus said, "Blessed is the man or woman who has a conscious appetite for righteousness." And dear friends, I solemnly submit to you, and I do this without fear of contradiction, that if you are a stranger to this, you are probably a stranger to grace. If you are a stranger to this, and even worse, if you resist this, you may never have been born of the Spirit of God. How many verses of the Bible you can quote is irrelevant. How kind or gentle you are is an irrelevancy. The historical influences in your life that have made you the person you are do not matter. If there is not in your heart an instinctive and conscious longing to be more like Christ, to be a holier man or a holier woman, then I submit to you, you may be numbered amongst the many who say, "Lord, Lord," but who will sadly hear those terrible words, "Depart from me, you worker of iniquity." You are not a blessed man or a blessed woman if you do not have an instinctive and conscious appetite to pursue God. Sometimes hunger is not just, sometimes hunger is also a painful longing. And we live in a time when not many of us have known this painful longing of food, not because you were disorganized in the morning and you left without breakfast, but because there is nothing to eat and you're becoming famished and your stomach is becoming distended and your lips are becoming purple and your shoulder bone is lifting up and your cheeks are sagging in. Not many of us know that discomfort today. But there is something about hunger and thirst, even at its mild level, if you have it right now, that makes it uncomfortable. Dear friend, have you experienced any inner pain in your hunger for righteousness? Paul did experience pain that accompanies this hunger and thirst for righteousness. He expresses it by saying, "O wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death?" Elsewhere he says in 2 Corinthians 5:4, "We groan being burdened." Friend, do you know anything about groaning in your spirit and being burdened by a sense of failure and uncleanliness? Do you? We are told in Galatians 5:17 that the desires of the flesh and the desires of the spirit are opposed to one another. The desires of the spirit are against the flesh, for these are opposed to each other to keep you from doing the things you want to do. Are you ever conscious of that inner pain of pursuing righteousness? Again, I say, if you don't, you have no grounds to claim you're a Christian.